Now it looks like we got a puzzle to solve. What on earth is Trump doing building a highway over in Africa? What on earth has that got to do with anything that's going on? Well, let's do a little bit of digging and maybe we'll find out.
Last week, the State Department released a 100-page report entitled Cuba, the Capital of 20th Century Communism, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio weighed in with these comments. For more than 6 decades, the Cuban regime has been the leading sponsor of radical leftism and third worldism in the United States. The State Department is exposing the full history of Cuban espionage and subversion in our country. Now, the media and the blogosphere looked at the title and they filed it under a Cold War rerun. They missed the real story. The report comes on the heels of a State Department ministerial meeting on terrorism. Trump administration officials made clear this is a present danger to the United States and to civilization itself. Secretary Bessent put it this way:
societies are rarely subverted from afar until they have first been weakened from within. So as it tears at the social fabric that allows our societies to function, left-wing terrorism is the visible manifestation of a much broader and more insidious effort to undermine the philosophies that built Western civilization and sustain all we hold dear.
The threat is real. Democratic Socialist candidates are winning primaries, and the networks connected to Cuba and international terrorist movements are not imaginary. But here's the question: how do you actually defeat it? I'm 𝓱𝓮𝓻𝓮 𝓸𝓭𝓾𝓬𝓮, and I've tracked this fight for decades. So if you want to stay in touch, hit those like, share, and subscribe buttons and help us expand our reach. Here's what I'm going to talk about today. First, how the State Department report on the Cuba threat gives you the first chapter in a larger story. Second, the fight they buried after World War II, the one that shows you where the threat really comes from. And third, why J.D. Vance's revival of Hamiltonian economics is the actual antidote, and how a road in Morocco provides the proof. So let's take a look at the State Department report, which extensively details the influence of Cuba on left-wing and terrorist groups, right here in the United States and throughout Central and South America. That's the surface. Now open the report to the first few pages and you're going to discover a paradox. And it's a paradox the establishment has been 60 years not explaining. The report says that Marxism, at least in its orthodox form, was not the original battle cry of the Cuban Revolution. Castro described himself as a radical, a revolutionary, a freedom fighter, but repeatedly denied being a communist. And in fact, the report cites and footnotes former CIA Director Allen Dulles, who testified in 1959 and said, "We do not think that Castro himself has any communist leanings." Now, Castro did embrace Marxist-Leninism in late 1961 after the Soviet alliance was secured. But the report notes that even then, Castro's Marxism was radically different from its Soviet counterpart. It was permeated by something new. That something new was third worldism. And the report says that the principal antagonist of world history was no longer capital, but Western civilization itself. Did you catch that? They just told you that the target wasn't economics, it was civilization. And that distinction matters because when the Soviet bloc collapsed, this movement didn't disappear. It changed its language. In 1990, Castro and Brazil's Lula convened a meeting in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and formed the Sao Paulo Forum to retool this in Latin America. The revolution changed operating systems. It used political parties, NGOs, and cultural institutions to push the anti-imperial cause. Part of the new operating system included drug trafficking and narco-terrorist groups, both for financing and for enforcement. But here's the part that shows the fraud of the binary choice between just communism and capitalism. Because wouldn't you think that the Sao Paulo Forum would be denounced or opposed by the Western elites? It wasn't. It was cultivated by them. Meet the Inter-American Dialogue. Founded in 1982, this was not a fringe organization. Its founding chairman negotiated the Panama Canal Treaty that Donald Trump is so fond of denouncing. Its co-chair ran the Organization of American States. It was incubated inside the Ford Foundation and the Aspen Institute. And what did this blue-chip establishment think tank do with Castro's Sao Paulo Forum? In 1993, it flew Sao Paulo Forum presidential candidates to Washington to meet with Clinton administration officials. This included the head of Colombia's M19. Now, look at who was steering all of this. Look at who's on the Inter-American Dialogue's roster. Robert McNamara, Vietnam architect, then president of the World Bank, setting conditions on economic growth. Maurice Strong, the man who ran the UN's environmental summits and pushed population control. These are two of the biggest advocates for reducing the world's population, whether it's through war, economic policy, or environmentalism. That's the apparatus that was underwriting the revolution. And that brings us back to the State Department report. The report does show the evolution of this movement from Soviet-style communism to Third Worldism, but it leaves out the institutional forces that help manage and deploy those movements. And that's where Promethean Action comes in. We trace the system behind the headlines and show how it operates. If you want to follow that fight, subscribe to Promethean Action's free newsletter. The link is in the description. These movements and these networks are real and they are a threat, but it's not the whole story. The rest of the story goes back before the Cold War. Go back to the end of the Second World War, to the Casablanca summit between Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill. Remember, Casablanca is in Morocco. We're going to get back to that. In an exchange between the two, which was documented by Roosevelt's son, Roosevelt told Churchill that peace in the post-war period demanded the development of backward countries. He said, "It can't be done, obviously, by 18th century methods." And Churchill responded, "Who's talking 18th century methods?" And Roosevelt replied, "Whichever of your ministers recommends a policy that takes wealth in raw materials out of a colonial country, but which returns nothing to the people of that country in consideration. 20th century methods involve bringing industry to these colonies, increasing the wealth of a people by increasing their standard of living, educating them, bringing them sanitation, making sure they get a return for the raw wealth of their community." And Roosevelt was personally committed to bringing those 20th century methods to Northern Africa and the Sahel. There's another name for 20th century methods. It's the American system, and it is pitted against the British system. It is development in the form of credit directed into production and infrastructure versus the British model of financial extraction and managed backwardness. But that imperial version of capitalism is what today takes the more respectable name of globalism. But Roosevelt died before the end of the war, and the men who inherited the peace did not want that fight for development to continue. So they gave the world a new binary: communism versus their version of capitalism. In 1948, in Fulton, Missouri, the same Winston Churchill, who was defending the British Empire at Casablanca, gave his famous Iron Curtain speech. And the question of freeing colonial nations from British and French imperialism was gone, and the Cold War was on. Now, obviously, communism is destructive. But notice what disappeared from the discussion. The British imperial system was no longer treated as part of the problem, and the imperial methods of financial extraction and resource control was all defended as part of capitalism. That's the box they want you in. But remember, Trump and his team have put this fight on a higher footing. They have identified the threat to civilization itself. And some parts of the administration are pointing to the actual antidote. And in the United States and some other parts of the world, it is taking root. So how do you defeat communism? You don't defeat it by merely denouncing the ideology and telling a 19-year-old that it doesn't work. Many of those 19-year-olds have lived their lives under a system that has been rigged by the global elites. And that doesn't work either. J.D. Vance identified this in his interview with Joe Rogan. He told Rogan that attacking socialism isn't enough unless you can give, especially to young people, an alternative to the existing system.
A Christian idea of political economy that's actually been lost in American politics, where it's like we think of it as libertarianism, the hardcore free market versus socialism or communism. And there actually is a third way that has existed in pretty much all Christian economic thinking going back 2,000 years ago, which is that, yeah, extreme wealth inequality does create problems, but you still got to have private property. You still have to have a state that protects private property rights. And there's a way to balance these things that I think we've sort of lost in our country, where ship all the factories overseas and let low-wage foreigners make our stuff. That was a bad deal for American workers. Again, it takes a long time to reverse that trend, but I think it's one of the best parts of Trump administration policy is you do see that trend starting to reverse.
And in other interviews, Vance has made clear that the system that we lost is the American system of Alexander Hamilton, and that under Trump, it is coming back. And those are the economics that Franklin Roosevelt was promoting as the alternative to colonialism at the end of World War II in that meeting with Churchill in Casablanca. Remember, that was in Morocco. Now look at what President Trump posted on Truth Social on Sunday. It is a beautiful video describing the new Donald J. Trump Highway in Morocco. And here's how it concludes.
Across its 1,055 kilometers, the President Donald J. Trump Highway is more than a road. It connects cities, ports, markets, and people. It is proof that when two nations united by friendship and a shared vision choose to act for peace, nothing can stand in the way of prosperity. Under the royal initiative to provide the Sahel states with access to the Atlantic Ocean, the President Donald J. Trump Highway strengthens the link between the Atlantic and the Sahel states and reinforces Morocco's southern provinces as a strategic gateway between Africa and the world. What does a road connect? A shared past and a future shaped by a mutual vision forward. The President Donald J. Trump Highway, the peace road for prosperity.
Over 1,000 kilometers down the Atlantic coast. And what's it for? To open up Africa and the Sahel to markets in Europe and the Western Hemisphere. That's not a slogan about development, that is development. A road stops being a road when it changes the economic geography of a region. It turns a place the empire treated as a quarry for raw materials into a place where the physical means exist to grow. That's the same method Roosevelt was fighting for at Casablanca, American development instead of British extraction. Vance named the principle. Morocco is pouring it into the ground. And the Trump tariffs and investment policies are bringing those American system policies back to the United States, taking on the hard task of rebuilding our working and middle class so that one income can raise a family. And communism is exposed as the dangerous failed policy it is. That's the fight, and Promethean Action isn't just exposing it. We're building the movement that can win it. So join us as a supporting member or a contributor and be part of this second American Revolution. This has been your Monday Brief. Thanks for watching.
Please take a moment and subscribe to our free newsletter at PrometheanAction.com.
Yeah, as the Twisted Self said at the beginning, looks like we found out what that highway's all about, didn't we? Something else we have as a puzzle. I read a book a long time ago, back in, oh my gosh, in my childhood almost, like it seems like a century ago. I'm not that old, so it wasn't a century. But in Og Mandino, he says that I will laud mine enemies and they will become my friends. And I will love my friends and they will become my brothers. Now let's take a look at what this world economic system that the U.S. is bringing back is all about. The U.S. system of economics and politics. It's a system where every individual matters, and therefore as collectively as a member of a country, then we are part of the country, and that country then matters. And that's the economic system of the United States. the true economic system of the United States. It's not the globalist regime. So Ogmandino's quote makes sense when you consider what's going on in Iran. A lot of people think that Iran won. I understand why they think that way, because on the surface it appears that way in some ways. But Iran, I will laud mine enemies and they will become my friends. If the whole world is going to be getting rid of the globalist regime, the one that wanted to reduce the population and control the remaining individuals for their pleasure and joy, well, that's globalist operation is his story. It's his story, and it's a chapter ending. That whole book is closed. That's a new book. It's not just a new chapter. It's a new book in the history of the world. And therefore, if Trump is making deals with Iran that appear that Iran's in control, I will laud mine enemies and they will become my friends. And you watch. The American military will be watching Iran like a hawk, making sure that they don't break any of the agreements that they have signed. And in so doing, Iran will be turned back to the people of Iran. And you watch the free and productive life that the Iranians had in the 60s and 70s before the terrorist regime that was created by London took over. Iran was a very civil and prosperous nation. Ladies dressed colorfully and beautifully. That will return to Iran. The whole world is making a transformation. It's not just in the United States. It's not just in North America. It's the whole world is making an abrupt change. And I've been saying this for a long time now, 5 years, 6 years. I actually started in 2017 coining the phrase tribalism. I thought I was the only one that used it. I found other people have used it, but no one is using it like I am. By 2030, our agenda will be in full operation, and we will thrive and be happy, and I call that tribalism. We will thrive and be happy. So, yeah, we have a highway, and we have a solution to a lot of world problems that are unfolding. And anybody that's paying attention can see that the American system of economics is, in its basic form, all that's required to usher in 𝓗 𝓗𝓗. All the people who have been screaming for that to happen are blind to the fact that it is happening right here, right now. So it's time for you to stand in your power. Stand upright. Make your own community better. Dig out the remaining people involved in the evil empire in your own community, because they're there. We have a lot of work yet to do to pull the weeds in the garden. And it's up to us, those of us who are awake to the real truth of what's going on. A complete transformation of the world from the North Pole to the South. We will thrive and be happy, and I call that tribalism. And from the bottom of my heart, I truly wish you and yours peace profound.